17 days after the funeral, my son called it practical. I called it my name on the title. The house still smelled like lemon oil and old paper, and the porch light clicked on at dusk without being asked. I stood by the front window with my hand on the curtain, listening to the refrigerator cycle like a man breathing in his sleep. Practical, he said, and I watched my own name on the mailbox answer him without making a sound. Mark and Laura arrived with tote bags and a printed checklist, the kind estate agents like to pass around. He laid the paper flat on the dining table, where the wood had a ring from coffee put down by hands that are now gone. "Dad, we need to be practical," he began in the tone people use when they want agreement wrapped as kindness. Laura nodded, pen poised, and added, "This is about safety and simplicity." I nodded back. I learned long ago that stillness keeps a conversation from tipping into a ditch. The list was tidy. It included the car, the smaller storage unit, the old drill press in the garage, and the house itself with a neat question mark. They had a realtor's card and a pamphlet about independent living with photos of smiling couples under flowering trees. Mark had put yellow stars next to the items he thought should go first. I listened while he explained property taxes as if I had not paid them for 30 years. He mentioned fall risks and outdated wiring. Laura mentioned a neighborhood break-in 3 streets over. They were not cruel. They were careful. And that can be harder to push against because it sounds like love. "I appreciate the effort," I said, and the room settled. "Let's slow our words and walk the ground." I picked up the list and folded it once. "Before anything moves, I want to read what the papers say." Laura offered to make copies. Mark suggested we schedule a realtor walkthrough next Tuesday. I did not argue. I did what I have always done when something feels bigger than the moment. I measured twice and let the rules hold. That night, the house learned my quiet. It learned how footsteps sound when a man moves without a second voice to answer. I made a sandwich I did not finish and stood by the back door while the motion light came on over the driveway. In the glove box of the Buick, I kept an old leather folder with registration slips and oil change notes. I took it to the kitchen and laid everything out like a mechanic setting parts on a clean towel. Titles, payment receipts, a letter folded into thirds with my name, spelled the way my wife used to write it. My thumb hesitated on that curve of ink. The letter was short and careful. It named the car and the house. It mentioned the account where the last hospital refund was deposited, and it mentioned me by the name only she used when the world was heavy. "If anything happens," she had written, "keep what keeps you steady. Sell what you choose in your time." A copy of the title sat behind it with a note from the DMV clerk in blue ink. My name was on the line it needed to be on. The paper did not raise its voice. It did not accuse. It simply sat there and remembered our life. I slept with the window cracked. In the morning, I went to Hank's hardware store, where the bell over the door rings a note that sounds like high school gyms used to sound. Hank wiped his hands on a cloth and listened while I told him half of the story. He said 2 things men who work with tools always say. First, don't rush a cut. Second, read the manual. He sent me to Mrs. Walker at the library for a primer on titles, beneficiary designations, and pay on death notes. He wrote library on the back of a receipt and slid it to me like it was a prescription. The library smelled like dust and plastic covers warmed by winter sun. Mrs. Walker wears a chain for her glasses and speaks in short sentences that somehow cover everything. She printed a page about vehicle titles and explained the difference between transfer on death and joint ownership. She pulled a pamphlet about durable powers and underlined, "When in doubt, ask for documents." Then she looked me in the eye and said, "Kind boundaries are a form of care." I folded the pamphlet and put it in my pocket like a small shield. 2 days later, Mark called with a bright voice and a calendar suggestion. "Tuesday at 2, Dad. The realtor's name is Craig. He's very good with sensitive situations." I said Tuesday at 3 would work better because the house knows me at 2. He laughed and said, "Fine." We hung up kindly. I made coffee and took it to the garage, where the light strips hum and sawdust holds a map of years. On the workbench, I laid out the DMV copy, the car title, the letter from my wife, and a pad of paper. I wrote the word boundaries at the top and underlined it once. When Tuesday came, I wore the jacket my wife liked because it looked like responsibility without trying too hard. Craig had a soft handshake and a quiet suit. He walked through the room saying positive words that hide hooks. "Potential," he said. "Charming." "Good bones." He asked about timelines. He asked if I had family to help with decisions. I answered what needed answering. I did not hand him the letter. I did not hand him a pen. When he left a brochure and a smile that assumed momentum. That night I put the brochure beside the letter. One was glossy in spoken numbers. One was paper that had lived inside our lives for years. I thought about the way Mark said practical, as if practicality were a virtue that required speed. Then I thought about the porch step my wife always warned me not to ignore. "You can trip on a small rise," she used to say, tapping it with her shoe. "Fix the small rise, and the whole walk is safer." I put a piece of blue tape on the step and made a note to plane it this weekend. Boundaries begin with the ground you stand on. Wednesday morning brought a message from Laura. She wanted to help streamline accounts, a phrase that lives in places with glass elevators. She suggested I add her email to my bank profile so statements would come to both of us for transparency. She proposed moving the car to a friend's lot until we finalize next steps. I read the message twice and answered once. "Thank you for thinking of me," I wrote. "For now, I will keep my own accounts in my own inbox. I will let you know if I need technical help." I pressed send and went to the porch to breathe. In the afternoon, I drove to the county office to ask the clerk how to request a copy of a will that had already done its work. The clerk had a calm that comes from knowing paper is heavier than most arguments. She slid a form through a window and circled the line where I needed to sign. "You'll get a copy in the mail," she said. "It will say what it says." On the way home, I stopped at the church to sit in the last pew where the light pools around the hymnals like a shallow lake. I did not ask for victory. I asked for clarity and a steady voice. The next day, Mark arrived early, bringing a box of trash bags and the energy of a man who wants to cross items off a list. "I'll start in the garage," he announced. I told him I would meet him there. Before I joined him, I took the letter and the title copy and slipped them back into the glove box, under the tire gauge and the small flashlight that refuses to die. When I opened the garage door, Mark had already pulled the drill press away from the wall and was inspecting the belt. "This is just collecting dust," he said. "Craig knows a guy who will take it." I put my hand on the table like a referee setting down a rule book. "Mark," I said, steady as a level, "we are going to work a different way." He straightened and waited, eyes impatient but not unkind. "We will not move anything today. Not tools, not furniture, not cars. We will not make phone calls for buyers. We will read documents together, and we will go by what they say." He opened his mouth. I lifted a hand, just enough to hold the space. "You will help me by scanning papers and putting them in folders by category. You will not decide for me. You will not represent my choices. You will not add your email to my accounts. If a safety issue comes up, we will address it with a professional who is not selling me anything." Laura joined us with a box labeled "Keepsakes," her smile arranged to disarm. "We're only trying to help," she said. "You raised a strong son, and I'm organized." I nodded. "I see your effort," I replied, "and I will use your strengths where they fit." I pointed to a small table near the door. "That's the scanning station. We will start with titles, policies, and the last 12 months of bills. Nothing leaves the house. Nothing goes to a third party without my signature." The room held its breath. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice, and then remembered there was no real emergency. Mark frowned at the drill press as if it had offended him. "Dad, you're being difficult for no reason," he said. "This is all going to be yours, either way. We just want to prevent problems." I could have told him that problems often arrive dressed as solutions. I could have told him that the last time he called something practical, it ended with me eating soup alone and pretending it was a choice. I did not tell him anything like that. I chose something cleaner. "Here is the reason," I said, and my voice was a beam across a creek. "I am the titled owner of the car, the named party on the house, and the person who will live with every decision made here. I am grateful for your energy. I ask you to direct it toward organizing, not steering. We will move at my pace, with the documents and with respect." Laura shifted her weight. Mark lifted his hands in his small surrender men do when the room doesn't bend. "Fine," he said, but the word had edges. We spent the next hour making piles that looked like a paper map of a life. Insurance here, utilities there, warranties, and a stack labeled "uncertain" that would find its name later. Mark scanned while Laura labeled folders with her neat schoolteacher handwriting. I kept my hands busy coiling extension cords that had learned bad habits. Every so often, I felt the letter in the glove box like a coin in a pocket. The idea of it steadied me more than any argument could. Around noon, Laura suggested a break and offered to pick up lunch. I asked for something simple and a receipt. The look she gave me said I had drawn a line she did not expect, one between courtesy and control. After she left, Mark leaned against the workbench and looked past me toward the driveway. "You know," he said, "I made some commitments at work based on you moving to a smaller place." He tried to make it sound like a small confession. It sounded like a contract I had never seen. That is your business, son, I answered. My business is here. I did not add anything sharper. I let the quiet do the work. We stayed that way until we heard Laura's car in the drive, the sound of paper bags, and the kitchen door opening without a knock. Because that is what people do when they believe the house has tilted toward them. We ate at the table with a coffee ring. Laura put the receipts beside my plate and asked if I wanted her to submit them to her budgeting app. I shook my head and slid the paper into a small ceramic dish where my wife used to keep stamps. Thank you, I said. I'll take care of it. Mark cleared his throat, the way he does when he is about to propose a schedule. So, Friday we can meet Craig again for measurements, and Monday we can talk to the assisted living place. I set my fork down and chose each word like a rung on a ladder. Mark, here's the boundary. I waited until both their eyes were on me. No showings, no measurements, no commitments. Not this week, not next week. We will finish scanning. We will read titles. We will list what is mine to sell and what is mine to keep. We will make decisions in the order the documents suggest. If you wish to help, you are welcome. If you need to make different plans, I understand. Laura's mouth tightened into a shape that has 1,000 names. Mark picked up the realtor's brochure and turned it over, as if there were instructions on the back for how to move a man without touching him. You're making this hard, he said, softer now because softness can sometimes persuade. I stood not to tower, but to put my hand on the back of the chair, the way a man steadies himself when the floor shifts under talk. I am making it clear, I replied. Clarity saves everyone time. The afternoon passed with the scanner humming and the old house learning a new rhythm. In the glove box, the letter rested under the flashlight. On the porch, the step waited for my plane. At 5 o'clock, I walked them to the door. Laura hugged me with a careful squeeze meant to signal patience. Mark patted my shoulder like he was congratulating me for finishing a task he assigned. I locked the door and leaned my head against it, the way a boy listens for thunder after lightning has already happened. Then I straightened, washed the lunch plates, and wrote 3 lines on a pad by the phone. Read title. Call county clerk. Fix porch rise. I put the pen down and felt the kind of peace that comes when a line holds weight without breaking. Quiet men still draw lines. Mine started on the porch. Morning came with a small envelope from HOA, the kind printed with a return address that thinks ahead. Inside was not a warning, not a fine, just a courteous reminder about exterior changes and vendor access. Please ensure any contractors or agents are authorized by the titled homeowner, it read. There were check boxes for yard service, repairs, and real estate showings. At the bottom, a blank line waited for a signature next to my printed name, which the office had on file from the day we moved in. I signed it and walked it down to the drop box by the community pool. The water was still under a sky that had not decided on noon. On the way back, I stopped at Hank's store for sandpaper and a new plane blade. He asked how the week was going, and I answered the way men answer when the ground is shifting but not sliding. I'm fixing a small rise, I said. He nodded like he could see the porch in his mind. Measure with your hands as much as your eyes, he said, and I carried the words home the way you carry a tool you only need once but remember forever. I set the plane against the porch step and shaved thin curls from the wood until the lip vanished under my fingers. It took 10 minutes. Small rises don't brag about the trouble they can cause. When I swept the curls into a bin, my phone buzzed with a message from the realtor. "Hi, Harold. Just confirming Friday measurements. We'll be quick." I replied with one sentence. "There will be no access while decisions are pending." He sent back a polite acknowledgement that sounded relieved to have clarity from the person who could give it. At noon, Laura texted a link to a great independent living place with a cafe and a shuttle to the mall. She added 3 hearts and the word "someday," as if moving a man could be softened by font. I thanked her and said I would bookmark it under resources, which is where you put things that may matter when they matter. Mark did not text. He called. "Dad, we're only trying to get ahead of problems," he said. I heard office noise behind him, someone laughing in a way the afternoon invites. "We can move the car to Craig's lot and have it detailed. It'll show better." "The car shows my name," I answered, steady without point. "It will stay in my driveway until I say otherwise. If I choose to sell, it will be because I have decided, not because someone can move it faster." Silence sighed through the line, not angry, just disappointed that the machine of momentum had found a break. "Okay," he said, and the word this time didn't have edges. "Okay." That evening, I put on a coat and walked to the library for a talk on neighborhood history. Mrs. Walker saw me and held up a manila folder from behind the desk. "For you," she said. Inside were copies of sample forms people used to list property for sale by owner, with lines highlighted where my signature would belong. She had written in small, neat letters at the top, "You decide the order of your life." I thanked her and sat through the talk about old trolley lines and a mill that burned down in 1913. People clapped at the end for a past that had learned how to stay in place. 2 days later, a second envelope arrived. This one was from the county clerk. It was the copy of the will I had requested, and it did what paper does best. It spoke without volume. My wife had been plain about what was left, and plainer about what she wanted for me. "Keep what keeps you steady." I read it twice at the kitchen table where the coffee ring had become less of a mark and more of a compass, pointing always toward the life we made. Mark and Laura came by that afternoon with a cake from the grocery bakery, a peace offering shaped like sugar. We ate small slices on paper plates, while the TV in the other room murmured a weather forecast. When the plates were empty, I set the envelope from the clerk on the table and tapped it once with my finger. "I want to show you something," I said. I let them read without guiding their eyes. When they finished, I placed the title copy beside it and the library pamphlet on transfer and ownership. I did not stack them like evidence. I set them like stones a man uses to cross a stream. "This is the order we will keep," I said. Not because I say so loudly, because the documents say so clearly. Laura pressed her lips together the way she does when she wants to argue politely. Mark rubbed the back of his neck. "Dad," he began, but I lifted my hand the way a teacher asks a room to hold still. "If we move at this pace, we will make fewer mistakes," I said. "If we honor what is written, we will respect everyone, including your mother." The last word made the room gentler. People sit up straighter when the dead are present. We made a list together, not the realtor's list, but ours. It said, scan all titles and policies, inventory tools, identify duplicates, car, reassess in 30 days, house, reassess in 90. The last line said, no commitments without written consent from Harold. And I wrote my full name because paper likes formality. Laura took a photo of the list. Mark put the original on the fridge with a magnet shaped like Ohio. That weekend, I fixed 3 small things. The loose hinge on the hall closet, a flickering bulb in the basement, and a drip under the kitchen sink that would be a problem if left alone long enough. I left the bigger things to the right kind of help. Boundaries are not a refusal of help. They are a way of choosing which help belongs. On Monday, Mrs. Walker called to tell me a community bulletin board had a note from a woman looking for an older Buick in good condition. No rush, the note said. Willing to meet owner at their home. Respectful of timing. I took down the number and set it beside the ceramic dish with the receipts. When Mark visited that afternoon to scan another stack of policies, I told him about the note. If in 30 days I decide to sell, I said, we will call her first. No lots, no pressure. We will choose a buyer who understands what a glove box letter is worth, even if they never see it. He looked at me in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy, and asked if he could borrow the car for prom. Okay, he said. Okay. Natural consequences have a quiet voice. The realtor stopped texting. The assisted living brochures curled at the corners and found a drawer. The HOA office sent a thank you email for returning the signed authorization note, along with a sentence about scheduling any future access through me. Mark's company moved a deadline he had been counting on. He told me over coffee, and it landed like a small stone in a big pond, circles widening, then disappearing. We'll manage, he said. That was his word, and this time it meant his own work. In the second week, Laura asked if she could organize the pantry while we scanned more papers. She likes orderly shelves. I said yes and watched her move labels forward the way people move plans toward the front of their minds. When she was done, she stood at the doorway and studied the room like a problem she could solve. I'm sorry if we pushed, she said. The sentence was brave in the way apologies are brave. It went first and did not look for a rope back. We thought we were protecting you from decisions. I nodded. I understand the feeling, I said. But decisions aren't a storm. They're a path. I'm still the one walking. That night, a neighbor named Miss Green knocked on the door with a wrapped dish and the grace of someone who has practiced kindness until it looks like muscle memory. We talked on the porch as the step held steady beneath our feet. She mentioned her brother restoring old cars and how some vehicles carry stories that add value you can't write on a bill of sale. When the time comes, she said, if you want someone to appreciate what's under the hood and behind it, we'd be honored to be considered. She did not ask to see the Buick. She did not ask for a price. She asked for my timeline, and I told her the truth. We'll know in a month. She smiled and said, then in a month we will ask again. Mark and I fell into a rhythm. He scanned. I sorted. We ate simple lunches and kept receipts in the dish. We learned how to talk without trying to steer each other. On Friday, I wrote porch light timer on the to-do pad and adjusted the dial so it would come on 15 minutes earlier. It is a small kindness to light the way home before someone reaches the steps. When he left that evening, he stood on the porch and looked at the plain, smooth rise with a mechanic's respect. "You fixed it," he said. "I did," I answered. "It was not a big job. It was the right job." In the third week, the county letter arrived confirming the property tax escrow had been adjusted after my wife's passing. The envelope included a phone number for questions about seniors' programs. I placed it under a magnet next to the list on the fridge. Programs do not insult a man's dignity when he chooses them himself. I circled a date on the calendar to call, not because anyone told me to, but because I wanted to hear what options existed that sounded like guardrails rather than rails. On day 22, Laura brought over a folder labeled Memories, and for the first time since the funeral, we opened boxes that mattered more than any title. We found letters in a handwriting that learns you better than a mirror. We found photographs no one had tagged because the faces were part of our atoms. We sat at the dining table, the coffee ring between us like a tiny moon, and we let our family talk in images. When the afternoon thinned out, I took the glove box letter from its place and read it to them. I did not make them earn it with a test of patience. I simply read the words she had written, the ones that told me to keep what keeps me steady. When I finished, Mark put his hand on mine and did not try to move it. The next day, I called Miss Green and told her we could talk about the Buick. Not because I had been pressured, because the month had turned in my mind, and the car had become more of a story than a tool. She came by with her brother, who listened to the engine with his ear and nodded like a doctor listening to a steady heart. "We'd like to buy it," he said, "as is, at a fair price." I named a number that felt like respect for both of us. He agreed and wrote the amount on a check at my kitchen table. I took the title from the glove box and signed in the right place, while Ms. Green read the will language to make sure we matched it. When they drove away, the driveway looked larger but not empty. I stood with my hand on the porch post and felt relief without regret. Mark texted an hour later. "Proud of you," he wrote. I stared at the words longer than a man should stare at a phone, not because they were rare, but because they were right-sized. "Thank you," I wrote back. "We did it in order." That night, I slept with the window cracked again. The house made the same old noises, but they had a new meaning. They sounded like a place answering to its owner. In the fourth week, I called the number on the county letter and asked about senior exemptions, not as a plea, but as a citizen. The clerk explained the threshold and the form. I thanked her and put the form in the folder labeled Taxes, where it would either become action or remain paper. The church called to ask if I would help set up chairs for a Saturday memorial. I said yes because lifting chairs with other men is a way to remember we are part of something that holds. On Saturday, Mark showed up early with a box of donuts and a quieter face. We set up chairs in lines so straight they would have made a gym teacher proud. After, we sat on the tailgate of his truck and drank coffee while the parking lot filled up with people in dark coats. "I said some things because I was scared," he told me, looking at the horizon rather than my eyes. "I thought if I moved fast, nothing would hurt." I nodded. Moving slowly hurts less and heals more, I said. Haste is loud. Clarity is kind. He told me about a deadline at work that had gone sideways because he counted on a sale that wasn't his to count. I had to tell my boss I spoke too soon, he said, and the confession was a soft, decent thing. He told me to slow down and check my authority next time. We both smiled because that advice belongs in more places than offices. He turned to me and lifted his eyebrows the way boys do when they ask for permission without words. Come by tomorrow, I said. We'll fix the loose railing on the back steps. Sunday afternoon, we fixed the railing. Laura swept. I made lemonade because we had lemons and sugar and the habit of doing small things well. When the screws bit cleanly and the wobble disappeared, Mark pressed down on the rail and laughed in a single sound that had no sharpness to it. Feels right, he said. It is right, I answered. We put the tools away in the order my wife liked, small to large, most used within easy reach. Order is a way you love people after they're gone. In the evening, I wrote a short note for myself and taped it inside the kitchen cabinet where the mugs live. It said, "Boundaries are a kindness." Underneath, I added, "Steady is a kind of love." The porch light clicked on a few minutes early because I had said it that way. The step held. The door locked with the solid sound of a house answering its owner. I washed the lemonade glasses in the plane blade and dried them until they shone without effort. Later, I sat at the dining table and opened the folder labeled House. The will sat on one side. A blank page for options sat on the other. I wrote 2 columns, keep for now and consider later. Under the first, I wrote house. Under the second, I wrote none today. I closed the folder and stood, feeling the kind of satisfaction that comes when a man chooses his own pace and keeps his own dignity. No speeches, no punishments, just natural consequences, teaching their quiet lessons to everyone who needed to hear them. When I turned off the kitchen light, the coffee ring glowed in the last of the day like the moon again. Small, constant, reliable. You can navigate by a thing like that if you are willing to look closely. I put my hand on the chair backs the way a man steadies a ladder he has decided to climb. Tomorrow would bring mail and maybe another brochure from somewhere with a cafe. It would also bring a porch, a step that did not trip, and a list on the fridge with my name at the bottom where the signature goes. Practical is not a speed. Practical is a direction. Mine points home.